The Arizona Territory stretched endlessly in every direction, a canvas of burnt orange earth and scattered sage that seemed to mock any man foolish enough to believe he could conquer it. Tom McKenna had been riding through this unforgiving landscape for 3 days, following a trail that existed more in his memory than in any visible markings on the hardpan desert floor. At 34, Tom carried the weathered look of a man who had spent half his life under the relentless southwestern sun. He was what folks in the settlements called a drifter cowboy, a man who hired his services to ranchers from Texas to California, never staying long enough in one place to call it home. His horse, a sturdy bay mare named Copper, picked her way carefully across the rocky terrain. Tom had bought her 5 years ago from a broken-down rancher in New Mexico, and she had proven to be the most reliable companion he'd ever known. The water situation was becoming critical. Tom's canteen now held perhaps 2 cups of warm, metallic-tasting liquid. He'd been rationing it carefully, but even conservative consumption couldn't stretch water indefinitely in country this dry. This was Apache country, had been for generations before white settlers arrived. Tom had heard stories about the Apache, most filtered through fear and prejudice. He'd never had much direct contact with them himself, preferring to avoid conflict when possible. But as the afternoon wore on and both he and Copper showed increasing signs of distress, Tom began to understand something the Apache had always known. In country like this, survival wasn't about conquest or dominance. It was about respect, adaptation, and sometimes pure luck. But before we begin, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're listening from. The figure appeared first as a wavering mirage against the heat shimmer. As Tom drew closer, the shape resolved into something real, an old Apache man sitting propped against a boulder, barely breathing. Tom's first instinct was to ride past. He had his own problems, his own dwindling water supply. But something made him stop. The old man's complete stillness, the dignity with which he seemed to have accepted his fate. Tom dismounted slowly. The Apache elder's condition was dire: cracked lips, papery skin, shallow breathing. But when his eyes opened, they held an alertness that seemed impossible given his physical state. "Water," the old man said in English, his voice barely a whisper. "Please." Tom felt his hand move to his canteen, then stop. 2 cups of water, barely enough to get him through the night. But the old man watched him with penetrating eyes, not judging, just curious to see what kind of man this cowboy really was. Tom unscrewed the cap. "Here," he said, kneeling beside the elder. "Take what you need." The old man's eyes widened slightly. With trembling hands, he accepted the canteen and took small sips. Tom watched his own survival chances diminish with each swallow. "My name is Ahiga," the elder said, his voice stronger now. "It means he fights in my language. Tom McKenna, and I reckon we're both fighting the same thing right about now. You are far from the settlements, Tom McKenna. Looking for work. Heard there was a ranch operation near Flagstaff. I am going home," Ahiga said simply, "to die with my ancestors." As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Ahiga spoke of this land as a living thing, of relationships between all living creatures that went back countless generations. "Your people see land as something to be owned," Ahiga said. "My people see land as something that owns us." Tom built a small fire and shared his jerky. "You ever regret it? Living out here?" "Every way of living is hard," Ahiga replied. "But here there is beauty that no man can own or destroy." "You gave me your water," Ahiga said quietly as they prepared to sleep. "Why?" Seemed like the thing to do. "Among my people, water is sacred. To share your last water with a stranger is to invite the spirits to notice your generosity. Sometimes they respond in ways that change everything." "Don't much believe in spirits," Tom said. "Belief is not always necessary," Ahiga replied. "Sometimes the spirits believe in us." Tom woke before dawn to Copper nickering softly. The mare was staring intently at something beyond their camp. Beside him, Ahiga stirred, his breathing more labored than the night before. "She senses something," Ahiga said without opening his eyes. "How did you?" "Animals know things we have forgotten. Your horse has been trying to tell you something." Tom walked over to Copper. She was focused on a gap between two large boulders, with unusual intensity. "What is it, girl?" he murmured, then looked back at Ahiga. "What kind of things?" "Water," the Apache elder said simply. "Horses can smell water from great distances." Despite his skepticism, Tom found himself following Copper toward the gap. As he approached the narrow opening, he caught the faintest hint of moisture in the air. The gap was barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through, hidden from view unless you were standing directly in front of it. "Ahiga," he called back. "Can you move? I think Copper might be onto something." With considerable effort, the old Apache managed to reach the gap. There was definitely moisture in the air now. Tom squeezed through first, with Ahiga following. What they found took Tom's breath away. A hidden alcove opened between the rocks, perhaps 20 feet across. The walls were smooth red sandstone, carved by thousands of years of wind and water. But what captured Tom's attention was the sound, the unmistakable trickle of moving water. In the center of the alcove, water bubbled up from a crack in the rock floor, forming a small pool before disappearing again into the stone. The water was crystal clear and seemed to glow in the early morning light. "Jesus," Tom whispered, dropping to his knees beside the spring. "Many names for the same power," Ahiga said, settling beside him with obvious relief. Tom cupped his hands and brought the water to his lips. It was cold and pure, with a mineral taste that spoke of deep underground sources. He had never tasted anything so good. Both men drank deeply, feeling strength return with each swallow. Copper found her way through the gap and drank with obvious satisfaction. "I don't understand," Tom said. "This wasn't here yesterday. I walked all around these rocks." Ahiga was studying the spring with reverence. Sometimes the earth reveals its secrets only when the need is great and the heart is pure. "You're saying this spring just appeared?" "Water has always been here, waiting. Yesterday you were a man concerned only with your own survival. Today you are a man who chose compassion. The spirits notice such things." Tom noticed faint markings on the walls that looked like ancient petroglyphs. The rock around the spring seemed different, darker and smoother. "How old is this place?" "Very old. Sacred to my people for many generations." Ahiga ran his fingers along one of the petroglyphs. "My grandfather brought me here once. He told me that water appears here only for those who understand that true wealth cannot be hoarded." Tom filled his canteen and spare water bottle. "So what happens now?" Ahiga was quiet for a long time, eyes closed as if listening to something Tom couldn't hear. When he opened them, there was new clarity there. "Now I teach you things that cannot be learned from books. Things about this land that your people need to understand if they are going to survive here." "Why would you want to teach me anything?" "Because you shared your last water with a dying enemy. Because the spirits have shown you favor. And because I think you are not just a drifter. I think you are a man looking for something he cannot name." For 3 days, Tom and Ahiga remained in the hidden alcove, while the Apache elders shared knowledge preserved for generations. The spring continued to flow, sometimes stronger, sometimes barely a trickle, but never disappearing entirely. Ahiga proved to be a teacher unlike any Tom had encountered. Rather than lecturing, he guided Tom's attention to details that had always been present but invisible to eyes trained to see land as a resource rather than a living system. "Your people look at the desert and see emptiness," Ahiga said as they sat beside the spring. "But there is no such thing as empty land. Every plant, every rock has meaning and purpose." He pointed to a seemingly barren stretch of ground. "That patch looks like nothing. It gathers seeds during brief rains. In spring, it explodes with flowers. The roots reach down to water sources that can sustain a man for days." Tom had been observing land for years as a cowboy, but he realized now that he had been seeing only surface features. Ahiga was teaching him to read the landscape like a vast, complex text. "Watch the birds," Ahiga continued, indicating canyon wrens at the rim. "They tell you about weather changes hours before clouds appear. Their direction, height, songs, all carry information." The old Apache demonstrated how to read signs indicating underground water, identify plants for food or medicine, predict storms by observing insects and animals. But beyond practical lessons, he shared a way of understanding the relationship between humans and nature that was fundamentally different from anything Tom had been taught. See this yucca plant? Ahiga said, leading Tom to examine a tall, spiky specimen near the alcove entrance. Your people might see it as a barrier, something to avoid. My people see medicine, food, soap, rope, and shelter all in one plant. The roots can be made into soap that cleanses without harming the skin. The flowers are sweet and nutritious. The fibers can be woven into sandals that will last 1,000 miles of walking. Tom watched as Ahiga demonstrated how to extract fibers from the yucca leaves, his weathered hands working with practiced efficiency despite his recent weakness. But most important, the elder continued, we take only what we need, and we ask permission first. We explain to the plant spirit why we need its gifts, and we leave tobacco as payment. You actually talk to plants? Tom asked, trying to keep skepticism from his voice. Everything has spirit, Tom McKenna. The Apache have always known this. When you understand that the land is alive, truly alive, you cannot take from it carelessly. You become part of the conversation between all living things. As if to demonstrate, Ahiga placed his hand on a nearby boulder and spoke quietly in Apache. Within moments, a lizard emerged from a crevice and sat motionless on the rock, studying them with bright, unblinking eyes. He says the weather will be clear for 2 more days, then rain will come from the south. Ahiga translated with a slight smile. The desert speaks to those who know how to listen. Your people believe man was given dominion over the earth. Ahiga explained as they shared a meal of pine nuts and wild berries he had gathered. My people believe man was given responsibility for the earth. The difference is between wisdom and destruction. Seems like your people have been doing more surviving than prospering, Tom observed. Ahiga smiled. What is prosperity? Your people count wealth in cattle and gold. My people count wealth in the health of the land, the clarity of water, knowledge from ancestors. By your measures, we appear poor. By our measures, we are the wealthiest people who ever lived. That evening, as the firelight danced against the ancient walls, Ahiga shared stories that went deeper than practical knowledge. He spoke of the interconnectedness of all life, of cycles that span generations, of responsibilities that extended beyond individual survival to the welfare of communities 7 generations into the future. When we make decisions, he said, we ask, how will this affect our great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren? Your people ask, how will this affect next quarter's profits? This is why your way leads to destruction, and our way leads to renewal. On the 3rd day, Tom noticed the petroglyphs seemed to tell a story. What do these pictures mean? Ahiga traced each symbol with reverent fingers. They speak of a great drought when rivers dried up and animals fled. The people were dying, and elders gathered to pray. One young man, always generous with his possessions, offered to give his life if the spirits would spare his people. He paused at a complex symbol showing water flowing upward from the earth. The spirits were moved by his selflessness, but chose differently. Instead of taking his life, they blessed him with ability to find hidden water wherever it existed, and they promised that wherever he shared water with those in need, sacred springs would appear to continue the gift. Tom felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool air in the alcove. And you think that's what happened here, when I shared my water with you? I think the old stories are instructions left by ancestors. Some patterns repeat across generations, waiting for the right moment and people to activate them. The young man in the story was not Apache. He was from another tribe, one that had been our enemy. But when he showed compassion to an Apache elder dying of thirst, the boundaries between peoples dissolved. Ahiga stood and walked to another section of the wall, where more recent markings had been added to the ancient ones. My grandfather carved this when I was young. It tells of a time when all tribes will need to work together to survive, when the old boundaries must be crossed by those with courage to build bridges. You think that time is now? I think that time is always now, for those wise enough to see it. Your people are spreading across this land like flood water, and my people are trying to hold back the flood. But water always finds its way. The question is whether it destroys everything in its path, or whether it can be channeled to nourish all living things. That evening, Ahiga spoke more directly about responsibilities than he had before. The spirits have shown you favor by revealing this place, and allowing you to hear old teachings. But such gifts come with obligations. You cannot return to your old life and pretend nothing changed. What are you saying? You have been chosen for something larger than yourself. The knowledge I've shared isn't meant to be hoarded or forgotten. It's meant to serve the land and all who depend on it. I'm just a cowboy, Ahiga. I don't know anything about being chosen for great purposes. The greatest purposes often choose the most unlikely people. Moses was a shepherd. David tended sheep. You gave your last water to a dying enemy, without being asked, and without expecting anything in return. That's the character spirits look for when they need someone to bridge different worlds. Different worlds. Your people and mine. Old ways and new. Earth's wisdom and civilization's ambitions. Someone needs to help them find a path that honors both, or this land will be destroyed by those who understand it too little. As they prepared for what both sensed would be their final night together, Ahiga gave Tom a small leather pouch containing seeds, dried herbs, and a piece of turquoise. These will remind you of what you have learned here, he said. Plant the seeds when you find a place that calls to your heart. Use the herbs when you encounter sickness that medicine alone cannot heal. Keep the turquoise close. It will help you remember that some things have value beyond price. When Tom woke the next morning, the sun was high overhead, and he was alone. Tom found Ahiga's note weighted down with a smooth stone beside the spring. Written in careful script on a piece of bark, it read, "The spirits have called me home by a different path. The spring will remain as long as you remember why it appeared. Use the knowledge well, my friend. You carry the old ways forward now. Ahiga." Tom searched the alcove and surrounding area thoroughly, but there was no sign of where the old Apache had gone. No footprints led away from the spring. No disturbed vegetation marked his passage. It was as if he had simply dissolved into the morning air, leaving behind only the sound of flowing water and the memory of 3 days that had changed everything. As Tom watched, the spring's flow diminished noticeably, the musical trickle becoming a whisper, as if slowly withdrawing back into the earth that had birthed it. "I understand," he said aloud, feeling only slightly foolish for speaking to the empty air. The gift was for a specific purpose, and that purpose has been served. He filled his containers one last time, took a final drink of the sacred water, and carefully tucked Ahiga's gifts into his saddlebags. Leading Copper back through the narrow gap, he emerged into the full brightness of morning. From outside, the entrance was almost impossible to see, just another shadow among the red rocks. The journey back to civilization took 4 days, but it felt like a return from another world entirely. Tom found himself seeing the landscape with completely different eyes, not as obstacles to overcome or emptiness to endure, but as a living system of incredible complexity and beauty. Ahiga's teachings had given him new vocabulary for reading the desert signs, and everywhere he looked, he saw stories written in stone and wind and the patient persistence of life. He found water where Ahiga had taught him to look, in the shade of certain rock formations, in depressions where ancient runoff had carved hidden channels, in places where the behavior of plants whispered secrets about underground springs. He identified edible roots and berries that had been invisible to him before, predicted weather changes by observing the flight patterns of birds and the restless movements of small animals. For the first time, he began to understand why the Apache had been able to thrive for centuries in country that defeated so many others. But with the knowledge came a growing sense of responsibility that weighed on him more heavily with each passing mile. What was he supposed to do with what he had learned? How could a solitary cowboy bridge the gap between two cultures that seemed determined to misunderstand each other? The answer revealed itself at Pine Creek, a struggling settlement facing abandonment due to well failure. Tom arrived during a town meeting where desperate residents discussed their crisis. "We're going to have to abandon the town if we can't find reliable water," the mayor was saying to a room full of worried faces. "The cost of hauling water is bankrupting every business, and we can't ask families to stay where their children might die of thirst." Tom approached the mayor afterward. "I might be able to help with your water problem. What's this going to cost?" Tom considered the question carefully. A month ago, he would have asked for payment, would have seen this as just another job. But Ahiga's words echoed in his memory. The knowledge was not meant to be hoarded or used for personal gain. Nothing if I'm right. If I'm wrong, you haven't lost anything but a day's time. Using Ahiga's techniques, Tom spent the next day surveying the area around Pine Creek. He identified 3 locations where underground water was likely to be found within reasonable drilling depth. The first attempt struck clear, cold water at 30 feet, abundant enough to supply the entire town with room to spare. By week's end, Pine Creek had gone from facing abandonment to having the region's most reliable water supply. Word of Tom's success spread quickly through the scattered settlements of the territory. Ranchers facing drought, communities with failed wells, mining operations hampered by lack of water, all began seeking out the cowboy who could find water where others had failed. Tom traveled from place to place, using Ahiga's teachings to locate hidden springs and underground sources. But he insisted on working for free, asking only for food and shelter in return. The knowledge, he explained to curious settlers, was a gift meant to be shared, not sold. He also began serving as unofficial mediator between white settlers and Apache bands. His experiences with Ahiga had given him understanding of Apache culture and values that allowed him to facilitate negotiations benefiting both sides. More than once, he prevented conflicts by helping each group understand the other's perspective. 5 years after his encounter at the sacred spring, Tom was riding through familiar country when he encountered a tense situation: Apache warriors surrounding a disabled wagon with a frightened German immigrant family. One warrior, Nailnish, recognized Tom and rode toward him with a relieved smile. "Tom McKenna," Nailnish said, "the spirits of good timing. These travelers are lost and without water. Their wagon broke an axle trying to cross the wash." What followed was delicate negotiation requiring all Tom's accumulated skills in cross-cultural communication. He spent an hour moving between the two groups, translating not just language but intent and cultural context, explaining that fear on both sides stemmed from misunderstanding rather than malice. By evening, what had begun as potential confrontation became impromptu cultural exchange. The Weber children learned Apache words while warriors examined German tools with professional interest. "You have become what the old ones predicted," Nailnish told Tom by the campfire that night. "A bridge between worlds. Ahiga would be proud." "You knew Ahiga?" "He was my grandfather's brother. When he returned to us after meeting you, he spoke often of the white cowboy who shared his last water and learned to see with Apache eyes. He said you would be important to both people's survival in the changing times." Tom learned that Ahiga had made it back to his people and died peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by family, happy that the old knowledge would not be lost. The next morning, Mr. Weber approached Tom with an unexpected proposition. His brother worked for territorial government in Sacramento, helping establish policies for dealing with Indian tribes. "What you did yesterday prevented a tragedy that could have hurt many people," Weber said earnestly. "You have a gift that should be used more widely." Tom found himself months later addressing territorial officials, struggling to develop policies that could reduce conflicts while promoting sustainable development. The story he told of his encounter with Ahiga, the sacred spring, and the knowledge shared became foundation for new approaches to both Indian relations and land management throughout the Southwest. Tom never became a politician or government official. He remained what he had always been, a cowboy who understood land and people. But he had become something more, a living bridge between different ways of understanding the relationship between humans and the natural world. Years later, as an old man himself, Tom would often return to the place where he first encountered Ahiga. The sacred alcove remained, though the spring never flowed again as it had during those 3 transformative days. But the petroglyphs remained, telling their ancient story of generosity rewarded and wisdom shared across generations. Standing in that place, Tom would remember Ahiga's words about spirits noticing acts of compassion and responding in ways that changed everything. He would think about all the communities that found water because of what he learned there, all the conflicts prevented through understanding rather than force, all the lives touched by the ripple effects of one moment of generosity in the vast Arizona desert. And he would understand that some gifts, like water and dry land, were meant to be shared freely, trusting that in the sharing, something sacred would continue to flow. The spring that appeared for 3 days had given them physical water when they needed it most. But the real gift had been the knowledge and understanding that would continue nourishing lives and communities long after both men had returned to the earth that shaped them. Tom came to understand what Ahiga had known from the beginning. True miracles were not supernatural interventions, but moments when human choices aligned with deeper patterns of generosity, connecting all living things. The spring had appeared not because of magic, but because two men from different worlds chose to see each other as human beings worthy of respect and care. And in that recognition, something sacred had been born, something that would continue flowing wherever people chose compassion over fear, understanding over prejudice, and generosity over hoarding. The desert had taught them both that water, like wisdom, was most precious when shared. If you like this story, leave your opinion in the comments and, of course, leave a like and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Big hug and see you soon.